Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Welcome to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I am so excited to introduce you to my guest, Dr. Daniel Franklin. Dr. Franklin is the author of Helping Your Child with Language-Based Learning Disabilities and a co-editor of the Los Angeles Psychologist. He holds a master's degree from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a PhD from UCLA in education. Dr. Franklin has over 30 years of experience in education as a teacher, administrator, and educational consultant. He is the founder and clinical director of the Los Angeles-based Franklin Educational Services. Hello, Daniel. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Oh, hi, Karen. Great to be here with you.
Great. You know, we had a really great conversation a couple months ago as we entered the summer months of the pandemic. And we talked about the summer slide, which has now been called the COVID slide. And, you know, at that time, there was fear from parents about their kids losing gains that they had made the previous school year. And I was thinking at that time about launching the Child Nexus Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. It was already in the works. And I knew that after that conversation that I wanted to have you come back come on the podcast and talk to you about the work that you're doing, because it's just so important to the kids that we serve. So I would just love for you to talk about language-based learning disabilities. I want to talk about your book, Helping Your Child with Language-Based Learning Disabilities, which people are raving about, by the way. And I often refer parents to your book. I think it's a must-have for a number of parents who have kids who struggle with language-based issues. But I want you to start by explaining to our listeners what you mean by a language-based learning difficulty.
Well, sure. Increasingly, we see that there's enormous overlap between different learning and behavioral characteristics. For example, we see that many children who have a specific learning disability in the area of reading, sometimes called dyslexia, very frequently have a secondary diagnosis of ADHD or another related learning or behavioral difference. We see this especially with children with autism who have a very high co-occurrence of also having ADHD. So we're seeing lots of overlap among many different learning and behavioral characteristics and many of the areas that affect language and language processing. So increasingly, a lot of us, instead of just saying dyslexia or ADHD, are grouping these learning and behavioral differences together in a global sense and calling them language-based learning disabilities. Because in my book, I wanted to cover certainly dyslexia and the writing version, dysgraphia, or the math version, dyscalculia. Obviously, there's a lot of kids with those challenges who also have ADHD and other related learning differences. So that's why we use language-based learning disabilities.
Yes. And I often see in my practice, and you've seen it too, the overlap of a lot of the struggles that kids are dealing with, where we can have two children with different diagnoses, and you see a lot of similarities in the things that they're struggling with, whether it be reading comprehension or written expression. And so I like the fact that we have this term to really better understand the struggles that they're dealing with.
That's right, because if we get too focused on just one very narrow band of learning difference, we might be overlooking other really important areas too. So I think it's important for us to be exploring all areas and providing support in all areas.
Absolutely. And I know that through your work in working with kids who struggle with these language-based issues, obviously there are programs, there's educational therapy, there's specialized tutoring, but you emphasize in your book, which is often overlook the importance of the relationship that parents have with their children and the relationship being an important component of the intervention. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There are lots of wonderful forms of intervention, and I'm a big supporter of these different types of intervention that are out there. I'm a big believer in early identification and early intervention. That is very important. However, we also want to remember that the human brain, especially the child's brain, is a social organ, that it functions best in the context of healthy, positive relationships, that indeed it only develops fully and in a healthy way through prolonged interaction with the adults, parents, teachers, other adults who interact with that child. The human brain is a social organ. So we really want to leverage the social nature of the human brain for all areas of learning and development. And when we start from the standpoint of promoting and paying attention to how critical healthy child-parent relationships are, we can begin to really make meaningful inroads into other areas of learning and development that need to be addressed. We call that healthy connection or attachment theory. There's actually a body of science referred to it as attachment theory, and which is basically an individual's internal model of what a relationship is. And for us as adults and for parents and teachers and clinicians, as long as we prioritize the quality of the relationship, we help children stay in a calm, focused, regulated state. And only a child who's in a calm, regulated state is in a position for meaningful learning.
And that's such an important point about kind of the mindset and the emotional state of the child when they're getting ready to learn. Because what I often say is that it's very difficult for children to learn when they're scared, dysregulated, or worried, right? And so getting them there is so important. It's such an important part of the learning process. And oftentimes a mentor, a parent, someone else who that child has a relationship with can really help them prepare for the learning process.
That's right. And you raise a really critical point here. One is that children with language-based learning disabilities are in a chronic state of stress, anxiety, fear, worry, and that when we take steps to help mitigate those really detrimental and impactful states of mind, we then help these children get ready to be in a state of learning, whether it's at school or at home or on the basketball court or playing field or even in a dance lesson or anywhere where they're struggling to pay attention to what it is they're supposed to be doing.
Absolutely. And when I think about parents wanting to help their kids and wanting to be there socially to support them, being there for emotional support, I think some parents are concerned about wanting to help their child, but also not wanting to enable them. And I know you talk about this beautifully in your book, and I would love for you to talk about that fine line, the need for that collaboration and that relationship, but also a parent's fear that they're enabling their child and they're not really learning.
Sure. And yes, kids who struggle need a lot of help. The demands exceed their capacities. So we do need to help in every way that they need help. I often say to parents when I'm speaking to them, the difference between a helicopter parent and a helpful parent is that a helicopter parent provides help that's not needed. A helpful parent provides help that is needed. And children with language-based learning disabilities need a lot of help. And we don't want to pathologize a child's need for help, nor a parent's effort to provide help by calling it, using some disparaging language like being a helicopter parent. That's being a helpful parent, and kids need the help. And the way we make that help productive and allow it to promote skills is we involve the child to the maximum extent possible so that they can see what it is we're doing in terms of organizing or planning or executing a task. And we involve the child to the maximum extent they're able to under the circumstances of that moment. I always say kids are consistently inconsistent. And so some days kids can do a lot and contribute a lot, but on the days they can't, we need to be patient with them under those circumstances and not say, oh, goodness, you could do this yesterday. Why aren't you doing it today? They simply don't have enough volitional controls to modulate their level of effort every single day. So that's why we need to sometimes provide more. And when we can provide less, dial it down a bit.
Absolutely. And that inconsistency can be really confusing to parents and to educators because they see kids being able to do things one day and not the next. And what I often tell parents of kids who struggle with attention issues is that inconsistency is the hallmark of attention issues, right? Kids can really pay attention to things that they're interested in, but they can't keep on paying attention when they're no longer interested.
That's right. And there can be so many variables that will impact what's going through a child's head at any given moment. And so, flexibility is the name of the game.
Yes.
Especially with kids with language-based learning disabilities, because they've changed so much, frankly, minute to minute.
Yes. And that collaboration is so key because you really get a sense of what it is that they're experiencing, their struggle through their personal lens. And then you get feedback from them in terms of what has been helpful, what is not helpful. And you get some feedback on the skills that they're developing.
That's right. And very frequently, especially for, frankly, all children with language-based learning disabilities, but especially children with dyslexia, say, while they're learning to read, they cannot use reading to learn. So when children are expected to learn something from written text, we need to think about bypass strategies such that they can acquire that information. One of the things I recommend, and frankly, I do a lot myself working with kids, is I will look at what it is they're supposed to learn from the reading assignment. I'll read it myself and then explain to them what it means. The point is they need to be acquiring content and understanding at that moment. It's not a reading lesson. It's a content acquisition lesson. So I really encourage parents to use bypass strategies if they have a child with slowly emerging skills like reading or like writing. While a child is learning to write, they can't use writing like we do as skilled writers, adult skilled writers, where we use it to organize our ideas and develop ideas. When you're learning to write, there's so many competing demands that it can be a real challenge. So I encourage parents and, frankly, educators, teachers to provide very high levels of support during writing activities. Ask a child, what is it we're going to write about? How would you like to start? Why don't you start speaking and I'll write down what you're saying? And then providing a child with some prompts and asking them some questions or to elaborate and continuing to write that information down. So writing actually becomes a very interactive, collaborative process. And indeed, children actually learn to write faster and better using this approach, as opposed to asking them to sit down and simply write on their own, which often leads to high levels of anxiety, stress, fear, and can be very counterproductive.
Yes, I've seen a lot of students and a number of them say that the blank page in front of them is completely overwhelming because they don't know where to start. They've got all of these ideas in their head. They don't know how to get it out. They don't know how to organize it, to plan it, to finish it once they start writing. And what you're saying is that you're really modeling that process out loud for them.
That's right.
In terms of how to be successful with the writing process. What does the writing process look like? What does it entail? And let's break it apart into smaller chunks so that now I'm showing you how to do it. And then you can eventually do this on your own. So it's really about skill building, but you first have to model and be a mentor to the child to show them how it's done.
It really is just what you said, and I agree fully. One of the issues that sometimes comes up is question of authorship when a paper is submitted that's written this way. And I have found virtually every teacher I've ever interacted with, as long as the parents I'm working with or whether it's me, if I'm really clear with the teacher about the approach to writing that I'm using, teachers are really comfortable with that and appreciate the collaboration and communication I have with the teacher or the parent has with the teacher. So we want to be really transparent, keep all our notes and describe our process to the teacher so that teachers are aware of how we're approaching writing support with kids who struggle with writing.
Right. And then also emphasizing that the ideas, the content, the ideas really came from the child and stressing that to the child, these are really great ideas that you have. And I can't wait to organize it and get it out on paper. And it just increases the motivation to continue to learn.
Oh, it sure does. And makes writing fun. And when kids enjoy something, they're more inclined to do it. And the more they do it, the better they get. And so this is how we can help all children, not just those who struggle with writing, but all children become better writers and enjoy writing more.
Great. And I know that through the work that you do, you work on a lot of those underlying weaknesses that kids have. We talked about reading, for example. There might be some kids who really struggle with phonological processing, and they need a lot of support in helping to strengthen those pathways in the brain that are associated with phonological processing. And you work on those. But you also mentioned some bypass strategies that while you're working on developing these brain pathways that might be weaker in some kids or organized differently, that you help them to also use some bypass strategies so that they can access the information. And you mentioned learning to read and then also reading to learn. So by the time they're in that phase of reading to learn, they have to read in order to learn their science, to learn history, to learn geography. So what are some bypass strategies that you found to be helpful for kids who are struggling with the reading process?
Very happy to explain a few, but I want to get back to a point you also made a moment ago, which is the critical need for identifying underlying language processing problems and addressing them, and doing that in a very focused way. We want to do that away from the other learning and content acquisition that's going on. It's really important to find time to provide children with the opportunity to develop phonemic awareness and to learn strategies to sound words out and break words into syllables, and to apply these skills that ultimately allow us to become skilled readers. And we want that kind of reading instruction to go on. Same with writing. We want to teach letter formation and spelling and help kids learn the mechanics of writing and the mechanics of reading. But we want to do that separate from content instruction. Now, with the bypass strategies, I often describe, indeed in my book, I call it the hierarchy of reading support. At the most supportive level of reading support, the parent or teacher, but typically it's going to be a parent helping with homework, reads the material and explains what it says. The next level down, the parent reads the material aloud to the child and checks for understanding. Reading disabilities aren't just about difficulty reading words. There's also a big reading comprehension. Frankly, a more general issue with comprehension. We see lots of kids with dyslexia. It's not just a reading comprehension problem. It's a more global challenge with comprehension. And so we want to help scaffold or break information down and scaffold how information is presented, provide opportunities to check for understanding, clarify misunderstandings, reinforce what it is they're learning from the reading material.
Now, you have really worked with a number of kids using a lot of the strategies that you have described, and you've worked with kids who struggle, and in doing so, you've really been instrumental in helping so many students experience success on an academic, on a social, and even an emotional level, because they take ownership, they experience success sometimes for the first time, and then they have this boost of self-esteem and self-concept. And you also know firsthand the experience of what a struggle is like. And you were featured in a really powerful short documentary, Unteachable, by filmmaker Anthony Sherin. I highly recommend it. It's very impactful. I believe it's only about 11 minutes long. Can you tell listeners about the film, how it came to be, and maybe even the take-home message in the film?
Sure. The film is Unteachable. You can find it on YouTube, but you have to enter the filmmaker's name, Anthony Sherin, Sherin. And Anthony Sherin was really interested in exploring the critical role that the healthy relationship between teachers and student have in promoting learning and development. And he focused on my relationship with my teacher, who both my 5th and 6th grade teacher, the same teacher, Mrs. Shirley Gott, who in a sense rescued me. When I arrived at her classroom as a 5th grader, I was, for all practical purposes, not literate. I could not really read or write. I couldn't even spell my full name. I could spell Dan, but not Daniel. And I couldn't spell my last name. And I came to her classroom essentially as a non-reader and also as a child who had a lot of fear and anxiety about learning and school. And it was through her unbelievable kindness and compassion and gentle, supportive approach to working with me in special ways, not necessarily in class, but maybe after class, or she'd asked if I would like to stay in. And unlike being punished, normally your kids are being punished when they have to stay in a recess. I love staying in with her and working one-on-one and learning to read and write and to spell my name. And above all, to begin to realize not only could I learn, I was a good learner. And it was through those two very special years in fifth and sixth grade of being in her classroom where she was my champion and my supporter. And indeed, we went on to have we were friends for life. I knew her throughout her entire life. We stayed in touch throughout her entire life. She has since passed away. So thank you for asking about that.
Yeah. And I think that experience and the experience that's depicted in the book and your lived experience is really a tremendous illustration of the impact of having that person who believes in you, who's willing to support you. And it also increases your motivation to want to learn. I mean, you have the opportunity to be outside playing at recess, but you would like to be in with her learning to spell your name. And so the relationship is so important to the intervention, but it also speaks to the idea, the importance of intervention and helping kids overcome difficulties and struggles. And when you do that, you increase their ability to not only be successful academically, but you really reinforce this love of learning and the motivation to learn. The kids realize that they can learn, and then they want to learn, and then they continue to learn.
And it all comes from a kid feeling really safe and secure with a teacher, feeling accepted and embraced. Teachers who are always very positive and affirming. Mrs. Gott never shouted. She never yelled. She was always kind and gentle. And even when class was a little bit disruptive, she just had a sweet, benevolent smile on her face, and we all melted and did whatever she wanted us to do.
Oh, and there's so many kids I can think of that I have seen who would benefit from having their own Mrs. Gott. So I'm glad that you had the opportunity to have her as your champion.
Well, I'm blessed, and I think about her every single day in my work. I have all the years, over 30 years now, I've been in education. There's not a day I do not think about her and apply the lessons I learned from her. The most important things I learned about teaching, frankly, I learned in fifth and sixth grade from Mrs. Gott.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful relationship. And it's just beautiful, the transformation that occurred as a result of that relationship. So I'll make sure that in the show notes, I put a link to the film so that other people can see it as well. So Dr. Franklin, we have a few minutes left. There may be parents who are seeing their kids struggle in school with homework, and they're trying to determine when they should seek support for their child. And I'm thinking right now of so many parents who are struggling with distance learning with their kids. And for some, the kids had struggles before COVID, and now the struggles may be exacerbated because of the transition to distance learning. And for some parents, this is the first time they are seeing their kids in their classroom in quotation, right? And they may be seeing struggles for the first time and wondering, did I miss a learning issue in my child? What should I do? Should I get support? What are some suggestions that you have for those parents who are concerned, especially now?
Well, a couple different thoughts here. One is, no two kids are the same. No two kids learn the same thing at the same rate or in the same way. There's going to be lots of variation from one child to another. Also, please bear in mind what we're experiencing now. I know many, many teachers. I'm very friendly with a large group of teachers, and I know how hard they're working. And teaching virtually is really challenging. So we don't want to make assumptions about a child's learning and behavioral characteristics on our observations of how they're learning virtually. But if you are observing learning differences, bear in mind there's lots of variation from kid to kid and timetables. Please also bear in mind that the thing kids need most from their parents is a sense of safety, security, and love. Kids who feel safe, secure, and loved tend to be really resilient, tend to overcome adversity, tend to do really well. So we never want to put school performance ahead of the quality of one's relationship with the children who they look after, their own or students or anyone. One thing I am recommending to parents for the kids who are really having a tough time is for the parent to gather as much information as they can about the important learning outcomes the teacher is seeking or teachers are seeking for their child, and to become actively involved in gathering information, learning about what the lesson is, the content is, the important goals of the lesson, and finding a time and a way to teach that separately, independently, perhaps later, or possibly even beforehand. Kids who have a sense of what is going to be taught tend to pay closer attention to lessons. So pre-teaching is a really good strategy too. Above all, please remember, and I'm speaking to parents now, your child is going to be fine as long as you prioritize the quality of your relationship with your child above other pressing considerations right now, anyhow.
Absolutely. And it seems that in this pandemic, where there's so much stress and anxiety, that relationship is even more important, particularly when you speak about safety and security at a time when, there's so much that people feel is out of control.
There is a lot of things that are out of control, and there's a lot of reasons for a child to feel scared now, and I understand that, and parents too. But I know that as a community, as we come together and reach out to one another and support one another and show children that we're doing that, by children can see that we're reaching out to one another and supporting one another. This gives children a sense of safety and hope above all. And so all those little things that we're doing to promote a connection and communication and mutual support, children see this and it gives them hope and safety.
Absolutely. And if it seems that communicating observations with educators is so important too, because like you said, the teachers are working so hard to deliver this curriculum in a way that they wouldn't deliver it under any other circumstance. So they're working hard and they may not see some of the things that parents are seeing because it's hard to pick up on a lot of that in a Zoom classroom.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
And so parents communicating with the teachers about what it is they're observing and the struggles that they may be witnessing is going to be important so that they are in a position to know how to support their child. And maybe the teacher can, again, be someone who they can collaborate with and determine how they can address some of the issues that they're seeing.
Teachers love communicating with parents, and especially when parents are writing thoughtful, tactful emails and reaching out to be a collaborator. Teachers love that. I know, Karen, you and I both have been classroom teachers for many years. And as a classroom teacher, I loved working with parents and wanting them to feel like my collaborator and partner. And the more we do that, and the more teachers will reciprocate, and we work together to strive for great learning outcomes and a happy experience. Above all, learning should be a happy experience for children.
It really should. And it's amazing to me that once you have those discussions with educators, small things that can be tweaked to make a big difference. I think about kids who are sitting in a Zoom classroom who are really young and it's gone on for too long and they haven't had a break. Communicating that information to the teacher, it's been an hour and he's 6. And he's getting really squirmy. Do you think we can have an earlier break time, for this child, or a longer break? Maybe the 2-minute stretching break isn't enough, or are there something else that we can do? Some sensory strategies that we can use during those breaks to really help kids to refocus, to engage, to give their brain a break from the screen for a while.
Oh, without a doubt, kids need exercise. They need activity. They need to be moving around. As Karen, as we both know, the research is robust that physical activity promotes cognitive development.
Absolutely.
And if we're aware that a kid has been still for too long, we've got to change things up. I always say, if you want to get a sense of what's going on in a child's brain, observe their body. A child's body does not belie what's going on in their brain. If their body is slumped over, their brain is slumped over. If they're antsy and bucking around, their brain is antsy and bucking around. And so if you observe a child's body, you know what you need to do to change the approach to make sure it's compatible with what we want and frankly need their brain to be doing.
Right. And kids are really great at telling you what it is that they need. And oftentimes if you just say, I'm noticing you're kind of slumped in your chair and you're having a hard time sitting still, what do you need right now? What are you feeling right now? And they'll tell you, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry, I'm bored, whatever that might be. And conveying that information to the teacher would be really helpful.
It's really important for that reason. And it communicates something else too. When you're asking or saying those things to a child or asking those things of a child, they realize you're empathic, that you care about them. And this makes them feel connected to you. And it keeps them feeling calm and regulated and allows them to continue to apply effort and to learn.
Yes, it lets them know that you care about what it is that they're experiencing and you want to help. Again, that speaks to your thoughts about safety and security and feeling, regulated.
Yeah, and there's lots of little things we can do, even in the context of a classroom, currently with virtual learning too, that, a gentle pat on a child's back or being nearby while they're on Zoom, doing our own work, doing our own reading or paperwork, or being nearby, physically present. These little things can go a long way in helping a child stay focused and feel regulated and cared for.
That's wonderful. Really great suggestions and great insights for so many parents. Dr. Franklin, this has been such a great conversation and such great information for so many families, for parents and educators. And I would love if parents have questions, if educators have questions, that they can reach out to you. Now, what is the best way for people to connect with you for a consultation or for support for their child?
Well, pick up the phone and call me. My phone number is 310-571-1176. Again, 310-571-1176. And I'd be happy to speak with you and arrange, or if I can't pick up the phone, I'll arrange a time to call you back and we'll talk. You can also contact me through, I have two websites. One is Franklin ED, Edward Delta.com. So Franklin ED, Edward Delta.com. Or for my book, it's Daniel Franklin PhD. It's all one, DanielFranklinPhD.com. And you can reach me any of those ways. I look forward to connecting with your listeners, to speaking with your listeners, and to collaborating with your listeners and helping in any way I can.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We will put all that information and the links for where people can watch the film Unteachable in the show notes, and also to get where they can get a copy of your book, which is fantastic. So this has been a challenging year, and you've provided such tremendous insights and support for so many families who are struggling. And I appreciate you. I appreciate your time and all of the suggestions that you gave to our listeners. And I hope that you'll come back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been my pleasure, Karen. It's been a joy to be here, and I look forward to connecting with your listeners in the future.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Daniel Franklin, one of our Child Nexus professional members. I can't wait to hear your key takeaways from this episode. For me, there were so many. Please share yours with me on Instagram at Child Nexus Community, and let's continue to work together to ensure that all kids can reach their full potential.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.